who has something on offer that could be further discussed amongst all of us. I saw quite an engaged discussion over there, but discussions were everywhere. We've got 25 minutes, which is not extremely long, but still a good time.
Well, we were discussing the notion of power sharing. If the notion of power sharing was not a concept in many cases imposed by international brokers, peace brokers, as United Nations or others. So, for instance, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the idea of power sharing has not come from within the conflict, but has been imposed. And also, in many other places, the idea of power sharing is maybe not really shared between the conflict parties, but they have to somehow to go for it because they have no other way, and they depend on the means provided by international community. So, what are the chances of success if some agreement is imposed on them?
Reactions?
I wonder, is it really the way it is imposed? A certain type of power sharing is imposed on these societies, but do we sometimes maybe not look carefully enough at the societies in a pre-conflict situation, whether there were forms of power sharing as well in these in the area? Bosnia and Herzegovina, I don't know really. I wonder whether there. I mean, they are. If you read some Yugoslavian writers, I read this. What's Die Brücke über die Drina, the bridge over this river Drina. I forgot the author. It's Ivo Andrić, yeah. Kind of. It seems that there was some kind of struggle all the time. There was the conflict which dates very, very late back, but somehow they were able to arrange with each other. I mean, and at least, okay, there were killings every now and then, but they were only 3 or 4 a year and not hundreds a year. And I mean, maybe it's easier to avoid 3 or 4 killings in a year than hundreds in a year. Maybe we should try and see whether they open up some chances. I'm just thinking aloud now. I don't really know.
I think the question that was asked by Thomas is actually a matter of local ownership, as I understood it. In my opinion, I mean, people and countries and communities and nations, they exchange a lot of things. They exchange, there is trade, there is an exchange of ideas, so why should there not be an exchange of ideas on political issues? The thing is that the decision and the power over the process must remain locally owned. And I think giving inputs and providing some ideas is legitimate. And afterwards, what is important is that the power over the process and over whether the people they want it or not must remain with them. So obviously, if somebody comes and imposes a process, that's not all right. But if you just trigger some opportunities or you give some ideas, and if there is a will to go further with it, you also provide more capacities or experts, I think that's fine, as long as the people have the power to decide themselves whether yes or not, and even how.
May I just add provocation to Thomas by asking, in those processes we very often talk about power mediation. Is power mediation and can it lead to ownership? I just put it as a question in the room. So. If you look at international negotiations, you quite often have mediators. And the idea is that these mediators should have a certain weight. perhaps because they have backing from one international party or whatsoever. And the techniques, as I read them in peace mediation, is quite often quite different from mediation in general, as there is, after all, the idea that, because now I simplify, because lives are at stake, you have to put enough pressure to come to a solution and to come to a signing of an agreement, to somehow have at least those, the rules and the quiet, that the weapons don't speak anymore, that from there you can build something. And there are some mediators, trained as mediators, who say this does not really correspond to a philosophy of mediation, and therefore is peace mediation real mediation? And with that, or always mediation, what's called as peace mediation, and therefore can it bring the benefits that we hope from mediation? You're shaking your head.
I think it might it could be a successful thing to put pressure on one of the parties for short term, but it will spoil the whole process and the long-term result, because after one the pressurized part.
Or do just we think it's not a foreign concept and think we can promote power sharing because of what we take for granted from our own countries?
I think the armed conflict shows that the negation of power sharing isn't the solution either, and if you do not agree on how to share the power, you can just keep on fighting.
Maybe I have to clarify. I didn't mean these mechanisms. Maybe I'm too much into Southern Africa, where power sharing meant that there is a coalition government between the opposing parties, and in the case of Zimbabwe, it was after elections that were won by the opposition, and the ruling party did not resorted to excessive power against the opposition. So the negotiations brought about a coalition government, and there this type of power sharing, in my view, is not democratic and cannot be maintained. But the transitional process is now about to lead to a new constitution and elections, and the constitution may of course include power sharing mechanisms like regional or others, but I was limited to that case.
What I personally see as a challenge now in Nepal, it was quite frequent when you come as a so-called expert, whatever makes you an expert, then very fast you are asked what would be the solution. And this also goes in the end that, you know, if coming from the outside to know the solution is can be very risky. And I think this I always try to avoid providing solutions, and try to stick a little bit more at different elements, different options, and always asking the question, yes, but what would be good for you, what would be good for others, and so on. Because I think after all, and I think Thomas, to some extent, Thomas has a point. I don't completely agree that power sharing necessarily is a foreign concept, because almost every society knows some mechanisms of power sharing. But quite often they become a foreign concept because they are not developed from the ground in a way, and not developed based on the realities, but because there is the thinking that you can have a model or also a toolkit, and through that create power sharing. But what I think is the huge challenge there is always the time factor. Because for building such a system, it needs time, and it needs many small steps. And coming out of conflict, we think this time is not there. And of course, I think there is also a huge arrogance, and I don't want to exclude myself, but there is always a huge arrogance to think to know it better, and therefore also to have the knowledge and to have the successful examples, and therefore perhaps consciously, subconsciously, after all, arguing for one solution or the other. But I think in the optimal case, also the expert would warn where there are difficulties, but in the end much more try to find out what do the people want and how can it be built in a way that it can work out. So it's perhaps more this kind of philosophy that I think should be also behind the expertise. Comments, more topics?
Yeah, I mean, I just joined your speech the last 20 minutes, but still I got some thoughts. What I just were thinking about, and we also had it in our small group discussion, was the big fear before maybe the real intervention really comes, and that this big fear of, oh, there's too many interests there, we never will find a solution, when we will take this as a knowledge, and this is really, it really thickens our actions, and this hinders really to to give a way for these inter-groups meetings, for example, which are also, sorry, I'm a bit slow in English now, unabhängig, independent from the result of these meetings. It's an action for itself, because, I mean, if identity comes through difference, then already this intergroup meetings are already given a new identity, and even are giving like a small step maybe towards a new common identity even. Because, I mean, it's always difficult to find a new common identity for all these conflicting groups. And if the fear only hinders us to go there, I mean, I thought this was your most important point, what you wanted to or one of the important points, that the right point is actually to do it in the beginning, because otherwise it's just getting harder to do. I hope
if you can.
That was understandable.
Yeah, but I think really this matter of emotions must not be underestimated. The fears, the expectations also, and to manage them in a way. And I had just a small example, but this is now again relations expert and a group. I once went to a meeting with people from the South. It was not the first time, but it was a little bit a different group. The first time I met them, they had told a lot about their grievances, about their expectations on the solution and so on, and about the pain that they feel, about the conflict and so on. And we had really a very productive discussion on different options and so on. And then I met another group, also from the South, where I then thought, well, I know more or less what is their concerns. And I tried to skip this phase and to plunge into discussion right away. And I learned it very fast. It was not possible to talk on any substantive issue, because it was just so important that they, on the one hand, had the possibility to bring out the emotions, but also that they had been the one to explain to me, and from there to build it together. And this is slightly a bit different, not exactly in response to you, but just to say this importance of emotions and of taking up emotions. And of course there is then also the challenge when you bring them, when they are then suddenly in one room, how they can react to each other. And I think there also the fear of failure, of course, but also the fear of being misunderstood. And this need to explain, and hopefully the willingness of the other side to listen.
I wouldn't call it emotions, I would call it building relationships before you can enter into a serious discussion.
Yeah. No?
Power sharing, we have to consider two different situations. One where the conflict is ongoing and the party are already ripe for the sharing the power, and that case would be one type of situation where that we can discuss. And the other is when the party when there is no conflict and this is no standard political process, like in the case of Switzerland, for example, where the power sharing mechanism could help sustain institution that is already workable. So these are, from my perspective, these are absolutely different situations, and we can just have to keep it in mind about talking about power sharing.